Thank you, John, for that introduction. What John left out was that the person I actually lost to in the slam dunk competition is 5'8". I'm almost 6'5". So you can see I chose to choose my profession according to my comparative advantage. Thank you, and thank you to the Foreign Policy Association leadership for awarding me this distinguished medal. I'm really deeply honored to stand before you this evening. For nearly 100 years, the Foreign Policy Association has served as a bridge to deeper awareness and understanding of U.S. foreign policy and global issues that impact our collective prosperity. For 60 of those years, the FPA has sparked essential public discussion through its Great Decisions program, encouraging millions of citizens, students, educators, and business professionals to think critically and in nonpartisan ways about international affairs and America's place in a rapidly changing world. Making great decisions begins with education. And making great decisions in the 21st century, now more than ever, requires global education. NYU's global mission is in fact largely responsible for my decision to leave California 5 years ago to become dean of the Stern School of Business. I mean, let's be honest, we all know it wasn't the weather. In these first decades of the new century, NYU has become the first truly global university, with our flagship campus at Washington Square, now joined by a network of 2 degree-granting campuses, NYU Abu Dhabi and NYU Shanghai, and 11 international academic centers spanning 5 continents. All counted, NYU sends more students abroad than any other American university. I'm particularly proud that since its earliest days, the Stern School's perspective has been an international one, even as it has deeply reflected the expectations, hopes, and fortunes of American society and enterprise. Established in 1900, during the greatest wave of immigration in the history of New York City, the Stern School was initially founded as a center of learning for the children of these immigrants who would risk much to gain greater opportunity and whose industriousness built our modern city. A century later, technology has accelerated the cross-border exchange of people, ideas, goods, and services beyond anything our founders could have imagined, providing a successful framework for 21st century education, turning the global challenges of our time into opportunities to create value for both business and society is now the core of NYU Stern's mission, much as these goals drive the FPA's activities. As the forces of globalization and technology continue to reshape our world and pose challenges to American businesses and employment, and as the balance of growth continues to shift from advanced to emerging economies, it's critical that tomorrow's business leaders and policymakers have a substantive understanding of people and ideas from other parts of the world. How else will they make the great next wave of great decisions for us to celebrate, and that we know we need if we are to see a more prosperous future? Ironically, in speaking to you about the need for great policy decisions, it strikes me that I also have some decidedly not so great decisions to thank for my standing here and being honored tonight. This somewhat dubious debt of gratitude goes to the late former Prime Minister of my native Jamaica, Michael Manley, who in 1975 famously declared that Jamaica had no room for millionaires. And for that, he said, there were 5 flights a day to Miami. At the time he made this speech, the country's stock market had already been in free fall for 2 years. Although my parents, as scientists, did not aspire to millions, in 1978, they took the Prime Minister up on his offer, moving our family to the United States. It is a sign of how quickly policy decisions can backfire that despite Manley's good intentions to create a more equal society, the hardships of moving a family of 6 from Jamaica to Wilmette, Illinois, with few assets, would afford my parents a better chance of educating their children than soldiering on in a country in the midst of economic turmoil. Manley's policy choices and anti-capitalist rhetoric undermined profitability and amplified uncertainty. Indeed, from the time Manley took office in 1972 until he was voted out in 1980, The Jamaican stock market lost 90% of its value. Capital investment collapsed, and unemployment skyrocketed to 30%. It is worth noting that this economic collapse took place within the framework of democratic institutions, including free and fair elections. Democracy and the rule of law are not, in and of themselves, safeguards against policy choices that create an inhospitable business and investment climate. If it's not obvious why this example drawn from my Jamaican childhood is relevant to current US attitudes and policies, or what this has to do with business education, consider the following fact. According to the 2014 DHL Global Connectedness Index, international capital flows as a percentage of world GDP still have not returned to their pre-financial crisis levels. This, despite the undeniable reality that freer flows of capital across borders, along with freer trade and other good economic policy decisions over the past few decades, have led to a significant rise in standards of living around the world. We simply cannot take it for granted that nations, our beloved US included, will continue to embrace globalization and the power of markets. While there's no denying that globalization has led to a decrease in inequality across countries, within countries, inequality is on the rise and has provoked a new wave of anti-capitalist sentiment, notably manifesting this time in advanced nations. The popularity of French economist Thomas Piketty's work by now speaks for itself. In the United States, resentment over the financial crisis and stagnant middle-class wages spawned movements such as Occupy Wall Street, with its agitation of the 99% against the well-to-do 1%. More recently, corporate tax inversions have drawn ire, with the result that any company that seeks to redomicile abroad being labeled as unpatriotic. As was made abundantly clear in Manley's Jamaica, rhetoric matters. Despite justifiable concerns over income inequality in advanced nations, there's nevertheless a significant danger in letting anti-capitalist sentiment go too far. Indeed, the rise of anti-capitalist sentiment in developed countries puts us on an extremely costly collision course with one of the most important economic trends of the next 2 decades, the explosion of working-age populations throughout the developing world. This year, an astounding 1.1 million new workers will join the labor force each month in the least developed countries on Earth. That number will rise to an even more stunning 1.7 million per month in 2030. That is also the number of new jobs those countries will have to create to keep unemployment from rising. China, by comparison, added an average of 1.1 million workers per month in the decades following the onset of its economic reforms under Deng Xiaoping in 1978. Bluntly, in order to absorb these new workers over the coming decade and a half, developing nations will need to create jobs at almost twice the rate that China did when it delivered one of the most miraculous performances of economic growth the world has ever seen. Rapid and persistent capital accumulation will be critical for creating employment and driving productivity and wages in systemically important countries such as Egypt, India, Pakistan, South Africa, Turkey, and Nigeria. But this kind of investment is unlikely to happen if we do not begin developing more coherent and responsible attitudes and policies toward capital accumulation, both in terms of the role of capital outflows from advanced nations and the acceptance of capital and fair treatment of it by emerging economies. Better than most, those affiliated with the Foreign Policy Association know that events and trends abroad have a direct and sometimes devastating impact on prosperity at home. Because of the interconnectedness of economies today, if global capital flows are allowed to dry up, it won't be only developing nations that will suffer. A lack of capital flowing from rich to poor nations will ultimately hurt US and other advanced economy fortunes as well. In the 21st century, we need one another to succeed. Addressing America's economic problems, providing greater access to education, increasing employment and financial stability, and reducing wage inequality is a nonpartisan concern, and all manner of well-meaning people can disagree on the precise shape of the solution that solutions should take. But one thing at least is clear. If we hope to have a more prosperous tomorrow, then, in order to be great, we need the leaders of corporations and congressional districts alike to make decisions based on good information. We need the kinds of great decisions that come with a global education. And we need, now more than ever before, the kind of deep engagement and international focus that the FPA so expertly encourages and that belongs in our classrooms, boardrooms, and halls of government. This educational partnership is one I feel passionately about, and is just one reason why, again, I feel honored and privileged to accept the FPA medal. Thank you very much.